You talk about, okay, so we talked about scaling performance and then there's scaling organizational health. Can those two concepts exist without the other, or do they work in tandem?
They both exist without the other.
Okay.
But you don't get the compounding effect.
Okay.
Right? So most change programs, many change programs are entirely about performance, almost usually cost, sometimes revenue. And that's, here's your target, go rip the cost out, grin and bear it. That is entirely performance driven. Here's your target, I'll check it in 6 months. Not very good, but it is entirely focused on performance. Some health or culture, if you were to use another word, programs are just that. And then it starts looking a bit divorced from performance. Why do we need a new list of values? Well, because it's important. Why should we work on trust? What is it related to how we make money? No, it's just important. There's been an entire, in fact, you can look at the relative difference between the providers of these services, that there are still boutiques that do one or the other. I only do procurement. I only do process-based consultation or leadership or culture. Divorced from, and our experience and our data suggests, you may get an incremental, particularly on performance, you may get an incremental bump in the short term, but it's not going to last. In culture, you will likely get, if you get any performance, you'll get a little bit of a bump, but usually it's something that people get disenfranchised with because it's not tied and people ignore it.
Give me an example of that.
Ropes courses.
Okay.
Kumbaya moments, thunder drums, right? Where you have typically driven by a function, often HR, without sponsorship or direct involvement of the people who have P&L responsibility. I mean, the secret here is that you change how you run the place while you're in pursuit of performance improvement. So let's say you're talking to people about having more of an ownership mindset. That's a pretty common thing, right? But then in the course of your transformation, you have an initiative that will now require 6 signatures to hire a new assistant. Is that really ownership? Right, so the disconnect between how we pursue performance, which is often centrally led, top down, without really taking into account why people aren't already doing what seems patently obvious. That's what would be performance only. So your execution of these, think about when you come to work or you interact with someone. What's the things that tells you about what's important? How they allocate money and people, how they set a budget, how they set targets, how they deal with consequence management for not hitting said targets, right? Those sorts of things, right? Things that you experience. Shouldn't those be aligned with what you say you want the culture to be?
They should, yes.
They should. Well, when they're divorced, they're not. And so you're forced now, you're putting rhetoric out in communication, saying one thing, we'd like you to feel like an owner. But by the way now, since we've ripped out all your support mechanisms, we're going to tell you what to do. And you're really a GM in name only. I'm not saying that that's a terrible thing. I'm just saying that often the disconnect between what you say about culture, usually in the form of rhetoric, and what you're doing in terms of pursuing performance improvement, they're not connected, and then it shoots the credibility.
Makes me think. And they should work in tandem. I think if you want to change something, even if it's not in an organization per se, but even in your household, I mean, you're changing the culture, you say one thing, it's almost like practice what you preach. If you want to see some change, you have to, all parts need to be working together.
You would think so. I mean, you know, it's interesting. We have so many things in our own lives that reinforce this point, but we ignore it, right? I mean, it is, I was joking about the crash diet, but think about the number of times you say, I've got a wedding, I'm going to, you know, I'm
going to get to go on the keto for a few days, yeah.
Yeah, to get it down, right? And say, and then,
but you gain it right back.
If not more.
Right.
You know, it's simple things like when they were looking at heart patients, and it's an interesting thing about discrepancy. If you said to people, if you don't change, you are going to die, the recidivism rate there was incredibly high. If you said to them, think about why it would matter for you to be around. I'd like to walk my daughter down the aisle, dramatically higher. There is just something here around the mindset matters from the gate, right? Are you aspirational or are you discrepancy? And everything you do is wired into that. Just, why am I doing this? I'm behaving differently in pursuit of this, not just I'm doing this because.